energy funding. So I hope you're in the right place. We're on the 5th webinar of our Clean Energy Funding series, and this one is on equity and Justice40. We're holding a separate program on this because it's an element of nearly any of the funding that you'll apply through from the bipartisan infrastructure law and through the Inflation Reduction Act bill and IRA, are best friends these days. And whether you're applying for funding for energy efficiency, renewable energy, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, multifamily housing, weatherization, or workforce development and other things, this Justice40 initiative will apply to your applications. And so I'm Sherry Gruder. I'm convening this series with UW-Madison Division of Extension through our Community Economic Development Program. And I also am director of the Energy on Wisconsin program that works with energy independent communities. And today we have a panel who will help you through this. Our goal is not only to tell you about the funding, but tools to use the funding, how to apply, and resources to help you even bring the funding to your programs and to Wisconsin. So today we have Robin Lusowski, who's the Managing Director of Policy at Slipstream, and Beth Haskovic, who's the Director of Rural Prosperity at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, or WEDC. This program is being recorded, and the slides will be made available to you afterwards, as well as a list of resources that you can access after the fact. So we are also going to have a Q&A session. And so you are welcome to put questions that you have along the way into the chat. We will answer them later in the program when it's the Q&A time. So with that, I'd like to get started. And Robin, you're welcome to put up your slides, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Sherry. Can everybody hear me?
We can, yes.
Great. It's good to see friendly names popping into the room. Good afternoon, barely afternoon. I'm Robin Lusowski from Slipstream, like Sherry said, and I'm going to talk today about what I'm calling a Justice40 initiative primer, kind of the nuts and bolts of the Justice40 initiative to get us more familiar with how this affects the funding that Sherry was talking about. Based on folks I saw enter the room, some of you might know this material even better than I do, but some might be beginners. So I'm hoping to proceed fairly casually, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A at the end of this. Just a word about Slipstream. We are a C3 nonprofit headquartered in Wisconsin, and we have the mission to accelerate climate solutions for everyone. We deliver on that mission with a range of services in the built environment, ranging from research to program design, program delivery, training and education, some policy analysis, and financing. So the Justice40 initiative, in a nutshell, carries this idea that 40% of the benefits from certain federal investments in climate and clean energy should go to disadvantaged communities. That's 40%. The benefits don't only refer to funding, but the overall benefits from these investments. If there's one thing you should take away, it's that understanding. A Justice40 initiative was created by Executive Order 14008 in the Biden administration, called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, and it was signed January 27th, 2021. This is a snippet on the right here of where Justice 40 is embodied in that executive order. The executive order itself is addresses a broader set of things in 3 main sections, but this small amount of verbiage in 4 chunks, A, B, C, and D, is what brings us Justice 40. I noticed last night in preparing for this that in the record in the Federal Register, there are only 114,180 views, and I swear a solid 200 of those are my own. And so by comparison, I think I saw that Kylie Jenner of Kardashian fame has 389 million Instagram viewers. So I think we need to round up a little more attention for this initiative in terms of popularity and socializing the familiarity with it. In terms of implementing Justice 40, interim guidance was issued by the Office of Management and Budget in July of 2021. That interim guidance clarifies that Justice 40 applies to federal agencies responsible for covered programs. It includes, that guidance includes an interim definition of what disadvantaged communities are, what covered programs are. It provides some examples of covered programs, addresses calculating the benefits, reporting, and then introduces an idea of pilots, of which there were 21. So there isn't final guidance yet, but the interim guidance has been amended. So flowing from that interim guidance, community and then disadvantaged are defined. Community there is defined 2 ways. The first being a group of individuals living in geographic proximity to one another, or not in geographic proximity, dispersed sets of individuals having something in common in terms of experiences or common conditions, like migrant workers or Native Americans. So those are the definitions of community, the community part of the definition of disadvantaged community, or DAC as they've come to be known. And then the disadvantage in that interim guidance for the implementing the Justice 40 initiative pursuant to the executive order is this list. I'm not going to read through them all, but it's really a combination of any of these variables or others. So it's things like low income or having higher persistent poverty, disproportionate access to high transportation costs, or disproportionate environmental stressors. So this definition feeds into tools. The order also really initiates the development of a screening tool that was directed to be built off of the Environmental Protection Agency's EJ Screen. And EJ Screen here is linked. Many of you are probably already familiar with using that tool. And the screening tool was to be made for the purpose of identifying DACs, or the disadvantaged communities. It's come to be known as the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, the CEJST for short. The beta tool was released in February of 2022 rather. And then there was a public comment period from stakeholders, and that was held open until April of 2022. Then in November of 2022, the first version of the tool was released. And that is what's linked in the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool link right on this page. It was prepared by Argonne Labs. And you can, if you have not already had a chance to do so, can kind of take that away and play with the tool, try to find information that you're looking for to identify disadvantaged communities. The purpose of the tool is to help federal agencies identify those DACs that they are describing as marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. The tool has socioeconomic, economic, and climate information about communities. It uses publicly available national data sets, and the pursuant to an amendment to Executive Order 14008, which was made in January 27th of this year, federal agencies are required to use this tool by October of 2023 to the best of their ability. So since the introduction of the Justice 40 initiative, and as legislation with funding authorization like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act have rolled out, various federal agencies have created some tools to help identify disadvantaged communities, because those this initiative sits on top of that funding. And since this tool wasn't necessarily finalized or using all of the data needed to meet the needs of an agency, these other tools surfaced. So in this amendment to the executive order, it's really the White House asking all federal agencies to use this single tool, by later, uniquely by later this year. So this is a look at the tool itself. This is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. You can kind of click on the map, and it's not live here for our purposes, but it's linked at the bottom. You can click on the map in whatever location you're interested to discern whether an area is identified as a disadvantaged community pursuant to this initiative or not. This is all done on a census tract basis, which generally have populations of between 1,200 and 8,000 people. That gray button or a gray circle, grayness indicates whether the area is considered disadvantaged per this tool. I think it's important to note that it was not originally in the original version or in the beta version. The federally recognized tribes were not automatically considered disadvantaged communities, but that change has been made since the beta version. For people who are much more comfortable in spreadsheets than in anything else, this is the page for you. In the red circle there, you can see there's a downloads option to get the data. And if you go, clicking that downloads page will take you to this page. And if you select, you can select CSV or Excel file. I've got the Excel one opened here. It's a lot of information in there, so it'll take a minute to download, and then produces something that looks like this. So all of those categories that we've been talking about that identify, that help, that are indicators of what is considered a disadvantaged community are across the top here. I've filtered this so that it shows Wisconsin, and it's by county and census tract in the far left or the first column. I've collapsed a couple of columns here just so that some information is available on the screen on this slide. But to the right of the slide, you'll see that you get a true or false result to show whether or not a census tract is considered a disadvantaged community. So a little bit more about what underlies all of this. As I mentioned already, publicly available data sets are used for this, and those are used as indicators of burden that are proxy for being disadvantaged. And those burdens are organized into different categories, kind of in two chunks, if you will. Census tract is identified as a DAC if one or more categories is above the threshold. If the census tract is above the threshold of one or more of the environmental or climate indicators, and the census tract is above the threshold for socioeconomic indicators. So that pink box to the right on this slide is the environmental or climate indicators. There are 8 of them, those categories of burden. Those include climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transit, affordable and sustainable housing, reduction and remediation of legacy pollution, clean water and waste infrastructure, health burdens, and training and workforce development. So in addition to the tracts that meet these criteria or have these indicators, any census tract that's completely surrounded by other tracts that are considered disadvantaged communities and are at or above 50% of low income is also considered disadvantaged. So by geographic association or proximity, that adjacency, a census tract can be considered a disadvantaged community as well. This, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but these 8 boxes are the same burden categories that were on the previous slide in the pink box, but it gives a little bit more detail about what the thresholds are for determining burden. And you can link to the sources and do kind of a drill down on this information. And then this is the second, this slide really shows the second chunk of indicators that's used to determine a disadvantaged community. And these have been updated over time. Several months ago, I think there were about 25 indicators approximately. And when I did an update on this list last night, noticed that there are several new categories, those which are noted in parentheses, totaling about 34 right now. I'm going to take just a moment to talk about this first one. So census tract information and demographics is one of the other indicators in this list, but it's not a part of the methodology for determining disadvantage, whether a census tract is a disadvantaged community. And I think it's important to talk just a moment about race. You might remember in the news, or if you were watching the work of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which is the advisory council also created by the executive order that created Justice40. It's that's chaired by Brenda Mallory. That there was pretty extensive discussion about race. Race is not one of the categories for determining disadvantage. The White House gave a statement on this, recognizing burden and the association between different indicators, and largely saying that, by not including race in these indicators, the hope was that legal challenge would be foregone. Various viewpoints held on that, including within the environmental justice community and the leaders who serve on that advisory council. So I think it's just important to have that understanding associated with the indicators as you're using this information and thinking about how Justice40 applies to funding that you might be pursuing. And that, whereas it's listed in, here, that first one, that census tract information, is informational. It's not part of the methodology itself, but it helps tell the story that can characterize the conditions in the people in the census tract in question. I'm going to shift here to talk about covered programs. So, I often hear Justice40 referred to as a program, or as Justice40 funding, or as a law, or various other things that it isn't. So as I mentioned already, the Justice40 initiative came to us by way of executive order. Executive order isn't a law, but can sometimes carry the force of law. And it is really, its charge is related to federal agency investments. So the covered programs are the federal programs that are in the Justice40 scope, because the investments fall into one or more of 7 areas where investments must benefit disadvantaged communities. Those 7 areas include climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transit, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and development of critical clean water and wastewater infrastructure. There was a list of all covered programs published on April 21st, and it's linked on this slide. You can take a look at that later. It's a 21-page document, so there are a lot of covered programs across a breadth of federal agencies, and that's what's considered covered. It's also important to note that Justice40 covered programs are required to engage stakeholders to ensure that, if a decision is being made for you, that you're a part of making that decision. If you recall, on an earlier slide, I showed the snippet of section 223. Which is just sort of this concise, short description of where Justice40 comes from in the executive order of 2021. Section D, that small paragraph, requires that covered programs report on how benefits are directed to DACs, specifically with an environmental justice scorecard. There was a stakeholder input process released or opened in August of 2022. Comments were submitted, not very many, and then there was an extension to that deadline to November 3rd, 2022, resulting really in only a total of 44 comments submitted about the scorecard itself. So the current status is that there is a phase 1 scorecard published. It basically includes information about what federal agencies are doing to advance environmental justice right now. It really serves the purpose of being a baseline. 24 federal agency, a baseline for the activities of 24 federal agencies in 2021 and 2022. And what those federal agencies are doing in regard to advancing Justice 40, what they're doing in regard to implementing, enforcing environmental and civil rights laws, existing laws, and what they're doing to embed environmental justice throughout the federal government. So this is a picture of what the Justice 40, the environmental justice scorecard that is flowing from the Justice 40 initiative in that executive order. So those are that's a logo and a link to each of the 24 agencies that are a part of this. I've circled the Department of Energy there just to give an example of what the scorecard looks like. So when I think of a scorecard, I'm usually that's usually got some quantitative emphasis on it, maybe a grid or graph format, something kind of dashboardy that really pops in quantitative terms, further explicated with some qualification and narration. So this might be a surprise to some of you, maybe not, but this is the Department of Energy, and this isn't this doesn't all fit in the layout of a web page on this slide, so it's not artistically placed here, but it is just the narrative description noting some some of the stats, what the Department of Energy is doing to achieve those goals. So this is the DOE's scorecard, and each of the other 23 federal agencies that have covered programs have prepared a similar summary of kind of where they're at in 2021, 2022 in terms of advancing environmental justice, enforcing civil rights and environmental laws, and kind of viralizing or socializing that, institutionalizing it across the federal government. And I think I'm going to be perhaps wrapping up a little bit early here. This is, I think, where it's important to understand what this looks like in practice. So Justice 40, the Justice 40 initiative is this kind of overarching or kind of foundational commitment or plan or requirement that affects how federal agencies make their investments, and that includes investments that they make by publishing funding opportunities for folks like you and me to pursue, to do the work that we do in various ways. So how Justice 40, continuing to use the Department of Energy as an example here, how this is showing up in funding announcements from DOE is largely through community benefit plans requirements in our proposals and then in delivery of awarded projects. So if you're proposing to DOE for funds to do work, you need to include a community benefit plan. And if you're lucky enough to be awarded, that community benefit plan will be carried through the life of that project that you were awarded. The community benefit plans address 4 main and arguably connected areas, including community and labor engagement, investing in American workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and then Justice 40 specifically. So it's pretty standard layout that the work that you're proposing and will carry forward needs to include these 4 areas. So on Justice 40 specifically, metrics are defined by the Department of Energy to measure how well the project that you're proposing or implementing really honors the goals of Justice40. And so it's a minimum of these proposers or implementers can add to these or refine them, diversify them. They include decreasing energy burden in disadvantaged communities, decreasing environmental exposure and burdens for DACs, increasing the parity in clean energy technology, access and adoption in DACs, increase access to low cost capital in DACs, increase clean energy enterprise creation and contracting in DACs, increase clean energy jobs, the job pipeline and training for individuals from DACs, increase energy resiliency in DACs, and increase energy democracy in DACs. So in a proposal, for example, and several in the room have probably prepared some now, or maybe just one at this point, but describing how your project will kind of deliver these benefits measured this way. So this is how Justice40 is showing up in solicitations that we would propose to receive funding for our projects. And here I've linked codes of the resilient codes FOA as an example, so you can see afterward how that is all situated within the request overall, and where Justice40 is kind of contextualized within the community benefits plan and how the information is asked for there. And again, I think I'm wrapping a little bit early, but I'm hoping for lots of questions.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that. I think we're gonna, during the Q&A time after Beth speaks, we might engage some of the folks who are on the program to learn what they're doing and what their challenges are or questions they might have. But next, I wanted to make sure that people realize that that rural communities, I mean, yes, color is not a determinant of whether you are eligible for Justice40, but rural communities are part of this. And I have had several communities in rural Wisconsin say, oh, we shouldn't apply for that grant because, we don't have a BIPOC community where we are, but in fact, that's not the case. And so Beth is going to talk about what WEDC can do to help rural communities apply for Justice40 funding.
Thank you, Sherry. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Beth Haskovic. I'm the director of the Office of Rural Prosperity at WEDC. We're still a fairly new office, so just to give you a quick recap, if you haven't heard me speak, our goal really as an office is to help rural communities navigate state and federal resources and to kind of serve as a one-stop shop for rural communities in navigating funding opportunities and receiving access to resources and helping to navigate those resources. And there's just a couple of things I wanted to talk about today in relation to the clean energy funding that's been mentioned. We can go to the next slide. So if you're not aware, we have a database of state and federal resources and grant opportunities on our website, ruralwi.com. Feel free to visit the website, sign up for our newsletter. We also send out monthly newsletters with lots of open grant opportunities on different topics that impact rural communities. And we do have a special page dedicated to the bipartisan infrastructure law. We probably will create something very similar for clean energy opportunities just because there are so many right now, and help to understand where money is flowing into the state and where there are competitive opportunities to apply. So that's one way that we help connect rural communities to resources and just help make it easier to search for those resources, because we do a lot of that work for you. And so you could just come to our website and learn more. And the other thing that we've been working on doing in a partnership with the Northwest Regional Planning Commission and UW-Madison and their university program is that we're connecting students, graduate students at UW with rural communities to help create letters of intent, concept papers, and proposals for some of these opportunities. And so if you do, this will be sent out, but if your community does have an opportunity and you would like some grant writing support from these students, we have a contact us form on our website where you can submit a project and what you're looking for and what type of support. Beyond just funding opportunities and grant writing support, we also offer technical assistance where our staff members can sit and meet with communities and make referrals to different technical assistance providers and grant opportunities and talk through projects and do some of that strategic planning work with communities. And then lastly, our office has been asked in the past to provide statewide applications to federal opportunities with both state and local partners. So we're kind of that convener of agencies across the state where a statewide approach or an application would be competitive. I see some folks on this call that I've worked with recently on some proposals. So that's kind of what our office does and how we can help support rural communities. We don't have a hard and firm definition of rural, but we tend to want to focus our resources on communities of 10,000 or less throughout the state that are non-metro. So that's just a high level. We'll make sure to get our contact information out, and again, the links to our website and our contact us page, and feel free to share those with your networks as well if you know other communities that might be interested in navigating the resources we have available.
Great, thank you, Beth. Wow, you get to have help in writing grants. That's terrific, because a lot of rural communities just don't have the staff to do that. And so I'm excited for that joint venture with the university. So thank you for sharing that. So I don't see many questions in the chat. Just to reiterate, we do have this recorded. The slides will be available, and then the resources. So all of the links that were in the two sets of slides are going to be on our resource page for you to access afterwards. Okay, so Peter asked a question. He said, in our part of Wisconsin, poverty is distributed pretty evenly and very common, but none of our 7 counties have one of the disadvantaged census tracts on the interactive map. So are they eligible for their low-income residents for the funding, even though they're not on the disadvantaged track? Robin, can you answer that?
Yeah, so for as the different federal agencies are making these investments through providers, that provider will be asked to propose services or a scope of work in a way that promises that a minimum of 40% of the benefits, again, not just funding, but all of those benefits as the metrics are intended to signal, are plowed into one of the DAC, or are plowed into DACs, not just one of them, but plowed into DACs. So there isn't a prohibition or an exclusion for kind of any funding opportunity. Again, Justice40 itself is not a funding opportunity. It's an initiative that kind of surrounds or overarches any number of federal funding or program opportunities. So there isn't an exclusion for other work that would involve low income communities or individuals, pursuant to whatever the program or funding stream is. It's just that in whole, a minimum of 40% needs to go into the DACs. To make that a little more, so that's sort of a sterile answer to that question. When you're a 7, in a 7 county, did you say 7 county area where there aren't any DACs, it will be hard to meet that commitment in your proposal or, in delivering any of that work if the DACs aren't there. So this certainly, from a really broad view, this is intended to make sure that funds get to DACs, right? So if you're in an area that doesn't have DACs, you're going to be a weaker candidate for funding that requires honoring this initiative. And all that said, so a third layer of that answer is that it's imperfect, right? The way that poverty, the way that all of this is measured is a first go. There have been some adjustments or modifications in the last year, 18 months to the screening tool itself. Things have been added so that more areas are included or more considerations are made, but it is imperfect. The plan, the committee, and the agencies supporting the development of the climate and economic justice screening tool itself, which is what's going to show, whether you're DAC or not, is said to be it's slated to be updated at least once annually. In this early part, that's been more frequent. It wasn't just one and done, but there were adjustments made iteratively. Does that answer your question, Peter? Might not be the answer you wanted.
Can we unmute Peter? Brandon, can we give people the opportunity to speak? So take off that hard mute.
They should be able to just unmute themselves. So maybe I can see if I can free up.
Thank you so much.
Hi, well, this is Peter. I just tried to unmute myself and it may have worked.
It did. Thanks.
So yeah, I was a little surprised. In fact, I was just on that interactive tool, like 3 weeks ago and looking into something. And again, we've got, if you look at the real poverty rate, not the official, probably 30% of our population is in poverty, but none of the census tracts showed up in that interactive map. So we have a lot of poverty, and by this program, and again, I'm not obviously complaining to anybody on this particular webinar because nobody here did it, but it just seems a little crazy that you can't help a very low income and otherwise totally qualified family just because they are not connected to one of these tracks. I mean, it's just kind of, and that's a story that is sort of unique to this particular initiative. We're able to do anything else with folks based on their individual family household characteristics, as opposed to having to be somehow in a community with a bunch of others. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well,
yeah, something that maybe mitigates that some is so these are Justice40 applies to the federal agencies making investments. So the work or the set of work or projects that you might be imagining aren't going to be at a single family level. It's going to be, federal agency volume of investment to, a fairly significantly sized project involving
I understand, Robin, but
yeah.
We have thousands of households in our service territory that could benefit from this by their individual household characteristics, but no census tracts. And again, obviously, this is a frustration not directed at you, but it's just, to me, it really doesn't make any sense. So in order to help those families, and those households, we would have to be part of like a statewide initiative or something. where they could hit that kind of criteria. I don't know. But anyway, it's
So Peter, have you looked at some of the grant applications? Because, and Robin, maybe you can answer this, but you know, typically when you apply for a grant, it says, here are the following 10 things you will be judged on. Just if, you know, you apply even for a Office of Energy Innovation grant in Wisconsin, right? Here's how we will evaluate whether or not you get this grant. And one of them is on equity and justice. And in the case of the federal grants, it says, and you will use these tools, right? And, you know, that there's some background work you need to do to show that you're complying. So do you think that that would negate somebody even being able to apply? Or, you know, do you have a sense of that at this point?
well, I'm really
I
not
hope
sure.
it's
You know,
not.
I haven't, you know, filled out those applications and looked at these things. We're looking for, you know, some of these projects that, you know, have the ability to do retrofits of multifamily projects and all that kind of stuff, which we have, you know, we have 1,000 units in our agency. But again, none of them are in that qualified census tract, any of the qualified census tracts. So I just don't, I mean, it sounds like it would be at the very least a competitive disadvantage if they are looking to spend 40% over all of these funds in those areas. We haven't applied for anything that's not part of our standard program mix at this time, but we're, you know, our grant writers on this, Sam Phillips is on this webinar as well, and trying to get a sense on how we can use this initiative to, you know, assist needy families in our area. And so far, not finding much of anything.
Robin, do you think you could turn your camera on and
Oh, so-
are
Oops.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. I went off when Beth was talking. Yeah, I mean, I think your realization is accurate at that point. You know, I would anticipate that more updates to what's considered DAC, you know, are probably likely in that tool, to you know, to remedy for things like you're talking about, Peter. It's not in there. It's not in there now. You already mentioned it, you know, partnering so that a project as a whole, and I see another question in the chat too, a project as a whole, even if the area where you work doesn't include DACs, your partners might. So together, you know, your aggregate work could be characterized such that, you know, 40% or more could go into DACs, you know, through partnership with other geographies.
I just wish, you know, I don't understand why they use geography to define the community. I mean, we have communities that are defined by other qualities that are much more relevant to whether or not these are appropriate, you know, use of these funds. And anyway, if anybody gets a chance to feedback, I've fed back a little bit to the feds and through the partnership and whatnot, but I'm not seeing any progress. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think your point, you know, in the definition, in the interim guidance, you know, if you recall, one of the first slides I shared today, define community in two ways. It's geographically connected and, you know, not geographically connected, but, you know, some sense of community that involves a shared set of experiences or something. A shared set of experiences, to your point, isn't reflected in a census tract necessarily in that way. So I don't know, you know, top of mind what the status of addressing that second community definition is or has been, but I'm happy to look into it.
I'd appreciate that. Yeah, I did see that, and that was encouraging, but then everything, you know, else that follows continues to require those census tract. I don't want to dominate the conversation. You've been very helpful. I get it, but just
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, we'll look into it, and, you know, thank you for bringing that up, because everybody, I think, would who's in that position would have the same question. I guess I'd like to ask, is someone on the line who's already addressed this in an application for federal funding? You're welcome to say something about it. It would be helpful to know how you approached it.
Sherry, I might offer that there are approximately just shy of 300 DACs, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, in the state. So that gives, not to pile on to the concern that Peter has already raised, but that's what's in the. I'm assuming everybody on the call is from Wisconsin or heavily involved in work in Wisconsin. About 299 census tracts, I think, that are identified as DACs in the current form of the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool.
Yeah. Well, and so right now there was just a call for putting together funding due the end of the month, actually, for EV charging infrastructure, and that also asks for having addressing environmental justice in that application. Okay, does anybody else have any questions or concerns or anything that they'd like to share that could be helpful? Okay, well, given that, I want to say that this isn't the only way that environmental justice is being addressed.
Sherry?
Also greenhouse gas reduction
Sherry?
fund. Yes.
There is one question above from Peter, not Kildy, but Fiala.
Fiala.
Yep.
Yeah. Robin, did you look at Peter's? You referred to it earlier.
So the question is, should funding directly benefit families or individuals in the identified census tracts on the map, or can it benefit organizations that benefit DACs that map may not be located in the map? An organization will have to demonstrate that the work it does with federal funding from covered programs benefits people in the DACs, and it's that doesn't necessarily have to be measured or isolated as families or individuals, but in that census tract. So this is normally going to be organizations pursuing this funding from a federal agency, and so and an organization doing so will have to demonstrate that they've plowed it into the tract, not necessarily into specific families.
Okay.
And
Good.
Nathan, I don't know if you meant to raise your hand, but you did raise your hand and we saw it. And so Nathan Sandwick, I don't know if you have a question.
Yes, you have a very sharp eye. I had it up for about 2 seconds there. I guess, the way some of the details of the discussion are going has me wondering myself, as someone here hoping to learn about this initiative, that Justice40, I don't claim to be an expert on it yet, but I guess in a nutshell, could we clarify this? This is more internal documentation of what counts towards that goal. Is it fair to say that it's not necessarily precluding, like every project funded by these covered programs doesn't have to meet this particular standard? Is that fair to say? And then the other thought on that was kind of related to Peter Kildy's concern, was just this general thought that as there are more deliberate efforts to make sure that the benefits of programs do reach some of these designated geographies, to the extent that there are lessons learned from that effort and from that experience, my hope would be that that may also serve communities in a similar situation, and even if they're not necessarily designated in the map. But again, I'm here to learn. I'm not claiming to know more about this than I bargained for today. So,
Right.
yeah.
Can you repeat the first part of your question?
Well, as we've been discussing, I just, looked up the Justice40 initiative, the executive order, and it just, the goal that 40% of overall benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. And we've been talking about the definitions of disadvantaged communities and what basically it counts towards achieving that goal of 40%. But I as far as I know, let me know if this precludes any community from benefiting from these programs. I'm thinking about the other 60% of that, the benefits of programs.
Yeah, I guess it kind of, it
Mhm.
sort of raises the question of which programs, right? Because this is the Justice40 element of this is going to be attached to any program that is offered out of one of the programs. So in there will be decisions that a federal agency makes about its own spend, things that they don't offer or accomplish through a contractor or a vendor or other kind of awardee stream. And so, and I don't think this is even determined yet, but they'll have to demonstrate that of all of the things that are considered covered within their agency, and I default to DOE a lot just because we're talking about clean energy and that's a space in which I work. Out of the whole of their spend, 40% of that needs to go into DAX. The other 60 doesn't, it's a minimum of 40, but the other 60, just for clean math, right, doesn't have to be. So in that way, yes, when the federal government or when a federal agency, excuse me, is awarding grants to proposers, like we, for example, apply, work with partners to come up with concepts to deliver emissions impact and increase, the equity of those results. A project, if we submit a proposal, we, in that proposal to DOE again, for example, we will have to demonstrate that 40% of the benefits, energy burden reduction, just disbursement of funding, access to new technology. You saw the list of 8 that I showed before, 8 minimal metrics, right? We'll have to demonstrate that a minimum of 40% of those do go into DAX. The other 60 can go elsewhere. The intent behind this is to make sure that federal investments really are reaching those communities, the DAX. Imperfect as the measurements at this moment might be.
And it's intentional because in the past, those communities really didn't get the funding. And they are so impacted by all of our fossil fuel energy health impacts and climate impacts, etc. And so this is a way to intentionally make sure that they're part of, raising us up to the clean energy economy and that they're benefiting from it as well. And so it's an approach that, hasn't been done before. And also there are a lot of initiatives that are coming up. Actually, some of them might be decided in June through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, GGRF, and some others where, there will be organizations led by nonprofits and kind of multi-group organizations that will work directly with those communities to actually help them benefit from this. So, we don't have everything in place just yet.
Yeah, and I think it'll be, I know this doesn't ameliorate any of the pain of lacking opportunity that you might be seeing in the specific geographies where you've worked, kind of given the discussion here so far. But I would, I've just pulled up again for myself, I don't have it displayed, the list of the 34 socioeconomic indicators that are included in the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And you know, it does include things like where there's a high concentration of asthma or high concentration of diabetes, high concentration of heart disease, high concentration of low life expectancy, housing costs, you know, where there's a lack of green space, where there's a lack of indoor plumbing, lead paint, you know, poverty is one of them, unemployment is one of them, the level of high school education is one of them. All tribal lands are automatically included, where there are transportation barriers, former Superfund sites, former, you know, other formerly used defense sites. That's a new category. You know, proximity to hazardous waste facilities, which, you know, could be a wide-ranging definition. Energy cost itself. So, you know, states in the Midwest like Michigan, you know, we got Wisconsin doesn't fare that well there, but you know, Michigan would do well by opportunity in that one. So I think the range of indicators that are there now and being added in sort of an iterative way is increasing what is eligible, while honoring, you know, the spirit of Justice40.
And I know that UW Global Health Institute has a lot of data on where those impacts are, and they've quantified, you know, that the health impacts, especially of climate change in our state. So I think their resources would be useful as well. And I do have them on the Energy on Wisconsin website, by the way. Well, thank you, everybody. You know, we're getting moving on this initiative, and thank you for learning about it and checking in. It is important that we all know about it and try to address it. So I really appreciate your time, and Robin, yours, and Beth for providing information. I want to say the next program in our series is on residential clean energy, and that's on the 23rd. So I hope you'll join us. And again, Brandon actually put in the chat, but you will receive it by email, the link to these presentations and the recording and the resources. And I would like to thank all of our co-sponsors on these programs, which include USDA Rural Development, Focus on Energy, Slipstream, PACE Wisconsin, Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, Wisconsin Office of Energy Innovation, and our local government center. So thank you all, and please reach out to our speakers and to my office for help, and all of the co-sponsors, because we're all out there trying to do good work to help you bring funding in. So thank you so much, and hope to see you in the next program. Have a great day.